Chapter 25. The rest of the week was quiet for Eloise. There were no more bread deliveries and no more questions from Tobias. She spent the days at home busying herself with whatever needed doing, and in her moments of rest she worked her way through the list of verses from Zeke, digging into the chapters, and returning again and again to read Isaiah 41. On Saturday morning, she'd been downstairs an hour before Tobias and Luke made their way to the kitchen. The stove was hot, the coffee percolating, and the sizzling bacon ready to come off the pan. As long as she didn't walk away from the stove, bacon was something she was able to serve with no apologies. "Morning, boys," she said to them with a smile. Father and son alike had puffy eyes and hair that stuck up in the back. Tobias settled Luke in his chair with a picture book and shuffled to the stove for the coffee. While breathing in the fragrant steam with both hands around the warm mug, he looked out the window.
"Might snow."
"Tobias, do you know anything about a Rachel?" Eloise fiddled with the end of her braid, waiting for the water in the pot to heat for the oatmeal.
"Nope.
Tobias said.
I don't know any Rachels."
He took the corner of the book out of Luke's mouth.
"Don't eat that."
Looking at Eloise, he asked,
"Should I know a Rachel?"
"Never mind," Eloise said. The facts just didn't line up. She hadn't imagined that letter. The words were clearly stated, "All my love." And the letter meant enough to Zeke that he'd kept it in his overcoat, likely pulling it out to read over and over again. What kind of man was Zeke at heart? She'd almost given in to his persuasions. He obviously felt something for her too, unless it was all physical. She blushed, remembering the way he'd caressed her face, drawing her to himself while his lips brushed against her temple. But if he was still in love with Rachel, why did he stay in Oaklebow? Why did he make advances? She couldn't bear to think that he was using her for physical pleasure. Was he interested in her only to fulfill a base need? She felt disgusted at the thought, but she also thought of the conversations they shared and the friendship between them. Those things didn't stem from his physical desires. Did they? Was she that blind? Her heart couldn't take much more thinking about Zeke. She'd sent him away, for good this time. Yet through her Bible studies this week, she didn't understand how a man who called God a friend could be capable of that kind of malicious behavior. If he loved Rachel, why did he confess he wanted more from Eloise than friendship? He'd practically spelled it out. Maybe not in so many words, but the message was clear. She wasn't going to be his plaything. If he wanted a toy, he could look for something above the saloon. If that's what he thought of her. For shame. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks just thinking about it.
"Hey!"
Tobias shouted at her.
"The stove!"
Eloise jerked at his cry and tossed her braid over her shoulder. "Ope! Sorry." The oatmeal boiled and the foam rolled over the edge, sizzling down the side of the pan and burning to the iron stovetop. The acrid smell bit her nose. What she wanted to do was pour her heart out to Jessica and let her friend talk some sense into her. She'd been brave enough to bring up the question of Rachel to Zeke, and though she hated the truth of his answer, she didn't regret asking. Knowing was better. Jessica was blissfully preoccupied with Roy, and as much as Eloise was happy for her, she missed having Jess all to herself. "Tobias, I'm going out." Sprinkling a touch of cinnamon and sugar on the oats, she served 2 sloppy bowls of oatmeal to Tobias. "Feed him, please. You'll clean more off his face and floor if you let him do it himself." Luke was content gnawing on a strip of bacon. The drool traveled down his arm to drip off his elbow. Eloise made a face and brought a rag to Tobias. "You'll need this."
"You're going now?"
Tobias glanced at the clock. She followed his gaze. The clock read 7:30. She looked around at the mess in her kitchen and realized she was still wearing her robe and stockings. "You're right. I'll need a change."
"You eating any of this?"
He craned his head around to follow her. "I hate oatmeal," she called, already halfway up the stairs. She took her time getting ready, deciding on the luxury of a bath, letting the warm water settle her nerves. Saturdays were glorious. Having Tobias around to wrangle Luke was the gift of the weekend. She loved the kid, but it was wonderful to stay in the bath until the water cooled. Even washing the dishes without tripping on the child underfoot was a pleasure. Eventually, she came down the stairs in her favorite blue dress, her long underwear underneath, prepared to go out. Tobias had attempted conversation multiple times, giving up when she had trouble putting a string of words together in answer. He was clearly confused by her cryptic departure, but he didn't question her. She must have snapped at him more than usual over the week. She smiled while tying her bonnet next to her ear. No matter, he would get over it. "I love you," she said, and kissed him and Luke. "Enjoy your day. Don't hold lunch for me." At 9:30, Eloise was finally on her way to Jessica's. Her hair had been brushed and coiled against her head. She'd used a few of her mother's combs, adding a touch of flair on an otherwise typical outfit. Tobias was right about the prediction of snow. It hadn't started yet, but it was cold enough that she had pulled her winter coat back from where she'd stored it in the trunk. Under the thick wool, she was well protected. The cold weather had blown into town over the past 2 days of little sunlight. During the night, a white sheet unrolled overhead, and it hung low in the sky. It almost blocked the sun from rising. It seemed to imply that it was prepared to stay. Thankfully, there was little to no wind. She took comfort in that. The brisk temperature was bearable when the wind didn't suck the breath from her lungs. She took the longer route to avoid walking by the bakery. A chance encounter with Zeke shouldn't happen until she knew what she would say. And for that to happen, she needed to talk to Jessica first. Despite the chill, it was a beautiful morning. It was cold, but in a delightfully crisp way. If the leaves on the trees weren't fresh and bright, ready for spring, it would have been the perfect autumn day. The sky was a vast white expanse that hung over Oaklebow like a down comforter, shielding and protecting. 2 blocks from the boarding house, she was happy to see Jessica walking toward her. They waved at each other like long-lost companions. "Good morning!" Jessica pulled her into a tight hug. "I was thinking about you. You have been avoiding me." Jessica waved her finger under Eloise's nose. "Zeke has been by to visit more than you, and he doesn't even live there anymore. We could have had a good game, the 4 of us." Jessica linked elbows and turned Eloise toward the square with an envelope in her hand. Eloise caught the name on the front, Rachel Donnelly. She snatched the letter from Jessica. "What is this?" Jessica shrugged. "Zeke left it. I'm sure he meant to post it, but he must have forgotten. It's already sealed and addressed. I'm taking it to the post office." Jessica plucked it out of Eloise's hands. "What's the matter, friend? You look half dead. You feeling okay?" Eloise was not feeling okay. She knew this heart-healing business would take time, but being constantly reminded of her problems was not helping. "You've seen Zeke this week?" she asked. "How is he?" "Oh, fine. He and Roy get along swell. We had loads of fun, talked about everything. Books, politics, childhood adventures. You'll come next time. Could we meet Monday?" Eloise couldn't get over the hump. Do you know who Rachel is? Because if she didn't find out soon, she would burst. The Palmers may know more about Zeke than she did, depending on the conversations shared around the dinner table during the week he had lived there. Jessica held the letter high and waved it like a flag. "Rachel!" "Stop that!" Eloise grabbed at her friend's arm, embarrassed that she'd make a scene. "Rachel Donnelly," Jessica said in an exaggerated whisper. Eloise jostled her friend, but couldn't help but laugh. "You know I love you, but honestly, Do you know anything about Rachel?" "Sure, baby. Sorry, I thought you knew. You and Zeke seemed all friendly-like." And then she launched into her presentation voice that Eloise knew well from their school days. "Rachel Donnelly, soon to be Mrs. Daniel Reese, is Zeke's older sister, adopted sister. She is the oldest daughter of the Donnelly family who raised Zeke after the death of his mother." She coughed into her closed fist. "May she rest in peace. Rachel and Zeke had a disagreement about the timing of his trip west. Apparently, she thought he needed to stay through spring planting, but all agree, Zeke, Roy, and myself, that timing had more to do with the upcoming wedding. I don't know the rest." She giggled and pulled Eloise close. "I confess to being overly interested in another man at the table. Roy pestered him about the whole thing, but I wasn't listening. We can go find him and ask, shall we?" Jessica's face lit up at the prospect of seeing Roy again. She flashed another smile. "Roy kept a hold of my hand under the table. It was practically indecent." If Eloise wasn't holding Jessica's arm, she would have sat down in the middle of the boardwalk. Instead, she pulled Jess to a stop. Zeke loved Rachel like she loved Tobias. She'd assumed terrible things about Zeke with nobody to blame but herself. Jessica was still talking, oblivious to Eloise and the fact that they'd stopped walking. Eloise didn't hear a thing. Eloise retracted her arm from her friend. "I have to go. I'll catch up with you later." Leaving Jessica calling after her, she made a beeline directly to Anderson's bakery. Her mind was a whirl of emotion, but the foremost being elation. "He loves me," he tried to tell her. He'd practically spelled it out, begging her to ask him to stay, and she'd told him to leave. "Please leave." Pushing into the bakery, for once not bothered by the bells that announced her entrance, she scanned the room for him. But he wasn't there. Agnes greeted her instead. Eloise offered a thin smile and a curt reply, but she had no patience for pleasantries. "I need to speak with Zeke. Can you let him know, please?" She kept her eyes on the door to the back room. "It's rather urgent." Agnes frowned. "Sorry, honey. He's not here." "He's gone?" "He left before dawn, though I made sure he had a warm breakfast and hot coffee in him. It's a cold one this morning." "Yes," Eloise said. "Thank you." She backed up to the door. She was too late. "Need anything?" Agnes pointed out the large cinnamon rolls in the display. "He managed to put together quite a spread for the Saturday rush before he left." Eloise shook her head wordlessly and wandered back outside. So that was that. 4 weeks, almost. And she'd ruined everything. She thought of Zeke's verse from Lamentations. "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed." In place of crumbling into tears, she straightened her shoulders and walked resolutely across town. If Jeremiah could look over his entire nation in rubble and speak words of comfort, the least that she could do was hold her head up and walk through town without falling to pieces. A town full of people who cared for her, whether she noticed them or not. Oaklebow had been a shelter for her all these years. The people had never shut her out, even when she tried to close herself in. Agnes, Helen, Tobias, Jessica, Jacob, and Florence. She tried to remember all the blessings that had been showered on her since her parents died. When her lip began to tremble, she clamped it down. She kept walking, kept moving. She meandered without thought of direction, going where her feet led. When she came to the street that led to the cemetery, she stopped. She didn't need to go there today. There was nothing for her there. No answers were found in the grave, and no comfort either. For a fleeting moment, she considered begging Frank for a horse and riding after Zeke, but he was hours ahead, and she would never catch him, even if she knew the direction he had gone. Hadley Springs was only 7 miles away, but there were other routes to the ocean. Standing near the edge of town with the cemetery in view, she tipped her head back. Her lip quivered, and she did everything in her power to keep the tears from breaking loose.